You may recall that back when we learned how to conduct the hypothesis test of the population variance, when we're looking at a single population, we used a chi-square distribution for our sampling distribution. Now we're looking at the population variances for two different populations, and we want to compare them. So we have two different chi-square distributions, which means for our sampling distribution here, we're going to use an F distribution, and that will allow us to look at the ratio of these two chi-square distributions. The test statistic for this sampling distribution is going to be an F-score, and all it is the ratio of the sample variances from the two samples taken from the two populations. So remember just that a variance is just your standard deviation squared. So a sample variance from that first sample taken from the first population is just going to be that first sample standard deviation squared. And then I'm going to divide it by the sample standard deviation taken from the second sample squared. And that is our F-score. That is the test statistic that we are going to use. And our F distribution is going to be determined by this F-score. We do have to specify our numerator degrees of freedom and our denominator degrees of freedom in order to know what F distribution we're working with here. These degrees of freedom might be what you would expect. Our numerator degrees of freedom is one less than the sample size that we used to find the sample standard deviation in the numerator. Our denominator degrees of freedom, we look at the sample that we used to find that sample standard deviation in the denominator. So take that sample, the sample size from that sample, and we just subtract 1. So we're just looking at the two samples in the numerator and the one we use in the denominator to find those sample standard deviations. Okay? Those are the features that we need for our sampling distribution. Except for that, the main steps for conducting a hypothesis test here are going to be about the same. We are going to first identify our null and alternative hypotheses. We are then going to assume the null hypothesis is true and identify the sampling distribution. That's this part right here. Okay? And then using that sampling distribution, step 3, we find the p-value. And then finally, step 4, we use that p-value, compare it to our level of significance alpha, to decide whether or not we reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative in its place.